Hi everyone, Eric with Timber Creek Collective here, bringing you a new piece called Mountain Cabin Nap. This piece was inspired by this mug that I painted several years ago. It was one of those paint your own pottery places that's not too far from my house. I really liked the idea of the cabin overlooking the mountains at sunset, and the cowboy looks pretty comfy there, kicked back on the porch. He's either got a good cup of coffee or maybe having a nap. But I had the idea that I could transition the light as you spin the mug around. So you can see it goes from evening to sunset to twilight and then to a nighttime sky. One of the coolest things about this was the blue speckled paint here. I was a little unsure about it when I painted it on there, but once it was glazed and fired, it actually turned out better than I thought. I have to say, I kind of surprised myself on this one. So if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I begin each piece by laying it out either in sketch, or when I have a structure, I end up doing what looks like a technical drawing or a set of blueprints. And that's just to make sure that the proportions are the way I want, everything is positioned on the plywood backer board the way I want, and that way it gives me a framework to use as I work through the project. Really does look like a set of blueprints. Must have been those drafting classes. So Mr. Aslan or Mr. Servey, if you ever see this, thank you. And as you can see, now that I've got everything the way I want it, I go ahead and darken up my lines, and that way I can see them clearly as I work through the piece. Next, I sketch in a ridge line in the distance, and I really like that mountain that's third one from the left. It's got a flat top to it, almost like a mesa sitting up on top of a mountain. I've seen that some of the places I've traveled and really think it gives it good character. And speaking of character, that cowboy looks awfully comfy. So I sand the sky, and that allows the paint or acrylic washes to go on smoothly. And then I come back and darken up any lines that I may have blurred by sanding. And when I first decided to do this piece, I thought about this cabin as a rock cabin, and I had to go get some rocks from the local arts and crafts store. And of course, it's an assortment meant for floral arrangements, not for making cabins in art pieces. So I kind of had to pick and choose my way through and find the ones that fit and the ones that I liked. And you'll see here, even though I go through the rest of the exercise of kind of dry fitting these, I decided that there were two things about this that I didn't like. Number one, many of the stones, if this cowboy had built them himself, would have been very large and very heavy. And two, the colors did not look like they came from the area where the cabin was built, and so I opted to go with a log cabin instead. I also painted the sky the first time and ended up not liking it, and what I didn't like was the dark blue on the left. It was too abrupt, too linear in the way that it transitioned to the evening sky, so I sanded it off and started over. So here I'm coming back with watered down acrylic wash, and then coming back in with the Starless Night blue. This is actually a latex paint from Bear that I bought and used on my very first mountain scene. I need to find some acrylic that's a similar color though, because I think that would allow it to blend even cleaner. And of course, when I get the sky the way I want it, then I mask it off so that I don't mess it up while I'm working through the rest of the piece. And now that I've got the sky masked off, it's time to start the cabin. You might recognize these strips if you've seen any of my other videos. I used these on the fall barn project that I did a while back. These have a great patina on them. I'm not sure what kind of wood it is. It has a very coarse grain if you look on the cross section. It looks like it could be oak, maybe red oak, but I can't imagine them using oak for a palette. It seems awfully expensive and a waste of oak. But either way, it has a great patina and it works perfectly for what I'm doing here. So you'll see as I get these pieces fitted, I take them off camera for a second, and what's happening there is I have the torch going to my right, and so as I get these pieces fit, I am running the edges, just the corners, through that flame, and it chars the corner and gives some delineation, some definition to each of the logs. Here I'm applying a little acrylic paint, gray for the chimney, because I didn't want you to be able to see any lighter colored wood through any rocks that I'm going to put down, and I figured it would be easier to paint that window before I boxed it in with the rest of the wood pieces. And I don't know if you noticed it when I was working on the right side, but there's one piece, and you'll see it standing on end here in just a second. I was using it as a gauge to make sure I was leaving enough of a gap for the end grain logs, or the logs that you only see the end of on the corners. There it is. So this top piece where the left side meets the roof, I had to trim it several times to get it just right where it lined up with the roof angle. Alright, cut and glue in my end grain logs here. That pretty much finishes the walls. This little piece right here, see how thin that is? That is a very thin triangle. That was one of the most challenging pieces out of the whole project to make, because it was so thin and so delicate and the angles had to be just right. It really took me longer than I ever imagined to get that cut and fit just right. Alright, so I still wanted to incorporate the rock, but I thought the chimney would probably be the best given the number of rocks that I felt like were the appropriate size and texture. So I went through all the rocks and I collected the ones that I liked or that I thought I might be able to use. As you can see here, I got them to fit fairly tightly. The inside edges of those logs were actually a great little bumper to help keep everything cleanly edged when you're working with rocks that are all different. Now overall, I like the way this chimney turned out, but my problem was it was absorbed into the walls. It had no depth to it. And so what I did was I pulled all the rocks out, and you can see I pulled them out by groups there along the bottom. And I cut these strips of balsa to fit, and what that's going to do, that's going to kick those stones out just a little bit further and make them look like the chimney is actually protruding from the edge of the cabin wall. Got those painted up, so hopefully you won't see the lighter wood underneath. Also, you may notice on this piece that you see two different backgrounds. Normally I work on a piece of MDF or wafer board in my garage. That's the one with the irregular shapes on it, kind of the wood tone. And then this, I'm actually working on my kitchen table. We had a snowstorm come through with some really bitter cold. It was too cold to work into the garage even with a space heater. So I ended up working at my kitchen table a couple of those days, and so I covered my kitchen table so I didn't get any paint or anything on it. And as you can see, I've got the chimney all put together, and it stands out a little more now, which was to my satisfaction. And here I'm putting in some 45-degree reference lines, and these are just to help keep the wood strips straight as I apply them, especially on the mountains. So So now it's time to start laying down the foreground. You notice I torched the top side of that first piece. These strips are 3/4 inches wide, which is what I use normally on my larger pieces. But these were much taller than the pieces that I normally get. They're thicker. And so I liked it so much that I ended up using it for this hill on the right side. Coming back here with some 3/8 inch wide strips. I think these are all 3/8 by 3/8. And this is going to help fill in some of the foreground as well. I ended up with 4 different depths on this piece. You have the first layer, which is the thicker pieces, and then you have this layer. The mountains are a little bit thinner, and so that adds a little more depth. And then you have the sky layer, which is just the acrylic wash. And I also didn't notice until I watched this on the playback, but my piece sometimes migrates when I'm working on it, so I'm going to have to come up with a solution to keep it from walking around. So as you can see, it's time to start the mountains, and I learned after my first piece not to work myself into a corner, and what that means is I always start on an edge and I work across. So no matter which side I start on, I don't start with any pieces that might work me into a corner where I'm surrounded on, 3 sides or sometimes 4, or where it's fully enclosed. It just makes the fitting of the pieces much more difficult and a lot more trial and error involved, and you end up not getting as clean of a fit as you do if you work across. You'll see there's a couple places in here where I work in some tighter spaces, but I don't feel boxed in. Work on mountain number 2 here. Well, you'll notice this here in just a second, but I opted to keep that top piece, kind of the mesa looking piece on this mountain alone until the end of the piece. I wanted it to be a little bit of a feature. I didn't want it to override the cabin or anything, but I wanted to make sure I had the right piece trimmed properly to go in that spot. If you were paying attention, you saw me glue something down that I wasn't happy with, so I ended up prying it up with the chisel and cleaning up all the glue and cutting another piece. And I had to have a break from the mountain strips, so I decided to go ahead and work on the cowboy that I wanted to put on the porch. And I tried balsa wood. It carved easier, but it was also very soft and split out. It just would not allow me to carve in the detail that I needed. So I had the idea to use this 1/4 inch plywood scrap, and you can see I used my Dremel to kind of cut the outline, and then I took it over to my scroll saw, which actually did a much better job than I thought of trimming out the detail. Once I got him cut out, get a little black paint on him where he's in silhouette. Let's set him off to the side to dry. And meanwhile, I'll work on some more mountains. See, there's one of those tight spots I was talking about. Gotta make sure there's no glue in there or the piece won't go in. It's gotta be cut just right or the piece won't go in. This contour gauge right here, that is a lifesaver. Yep, I had to make one adjustment to it and it was the way I wanted. That one, it took several attempts, if you were noticing. This is where patience really pays off, making sure that everything is fit together properly. If you get in a hurry, you won't be happy with the result. So you'll notice when I'm laying this first strip of this 3rd mountain down, I'm using those reference lines to keep me at a 45-degree angle, and that allows all the rest of the pieces to be based on that first piece that I put down and keep everything on a good clean 45-degree angle. That's why I do those in advance. Another little tight spot, little bitty triangles. Those are always a bit of a challenge. And you'll see another tight space, so contour gauge to the rescue. And my head gets in the way of some of this. I just couldn't see the top of the cabin to make sure it was fitting with the wood strips cleanly. Another challenge is working around these rocks on the chimney. Just they're irregularly shaped, and so you can't do anything that's square or straight. It's all custom fit. See this little bitty triangle, I have to cut one here. Got to paint the stovepipe at the top of the chimney. Fitting around rocks. And you'll see that I've got one more little triangle to cut here. Trial and error is usually the best way to get those to fit. Decided to go with some more horizontal strips over here on the left. Contour gauge to the rescue one more time. As I'm finishing this last mount here, you may notice that I painted the area of the porch gray. I ended up not liking that because it was one of the only gray things on the entire piece, and I ended up coming back after I get the cowboy glued down and ended up using the torch to darken it up so that it blended in more with the rest of the piece. So here I am fitting the last piece for the top of this mountain. Alright, so this is sped up, but not as much as the other sections, and the reason I slowed it down a little bit over the others is I love to see what the torch does. And in reality, I'm not moving all that fast, but I'm not exactly staying in one spot. I don't want to scorch or catch anything on fire, but the torch can really give some great contour to your foreground, and your wood pieces bring out those grains. And then I also use it to delineate the ridge lines. You see here, it does an amazing job of shading everything. I just never imagined that it would do that. Can't really see what I'm doing very well here, but what I'm doing is I'm standing the piece up so that I can torch the top of the hill here on the right, in the foreground, and then also the tops of the peaks. Now in so doing, you can see the masking tape took quite a bit of the heat from the torch, and it caused me a little bit of an issue trying to get the tape off. Our cowboy position here. And I had to add one little strip at the bottom just to make sure everything fit flush against the frame. pulling the masking tape off, and you can see the parts that stuck, and I actually had to flip the piece over so that I could use the utility knife to trim that tape away. And as you can see, some of the charred tape actually got up into the sunset, so maybe those are UFOs, maybe they're birds, or maybe they're sunspots, I don't know. That is finished except for the frame. Do a little final trimming on the table saw. I heat pin out and sign this one. And there's the finished product. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more videos like this, check out these on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much. See you soon.